1. You're on.
Hey folks, so we're back for our second session of live streaming on Facebook. We're going to be doing a Galaxy Vortex Marble today. It's crazy, it's already been a week since we kind of closed the doors to the public, but we're still busy making glass. I was in need of a haircut before this all hit, and now my hair's getting really long, and I'm a little nervous what it's going to be like in a couple more weeks here if this keeps up. So in the meantime, we're going to keep blowing glass. We'll see how long my hair gets, and I'll try to keep control of it the best I can. The Galaxy Vortex Marble we're doing today is another memorial piece, kind of like we did the other day. I've already pre-mixed the ashes just because that's, you've seen that once already on Monday for the pendants. If you haven't seen that, go back and check it out. The ash is already mixed up. We're going to be doing a Galaxy Vortex 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches is right around the size of a golf ball. This is the marble mold that I'll be using to round that out, so that's the size we're shooting for. It's the smallest size we do our memorial marbles in because it's really hard to get all the layers into a marble any smaller than that. You actually have to build them pretty tiny in order to get like 1.25 inch marble. They're almost harder to make than like 1 3/4 inches. So 1.5 inches is as small as we do the memorial pieces. This piece of clear glass is almost entirely going to go into the lens of the marble. We're going to do our design on the very end. We're going to add the ashes and the dichroic sparkles and build the whole back half of the marble essentially at the end of this rod. And then I'll melt down a majority of this clear to create the lens that magnifies it. It's really important when you're making marbles that you try to use one piece of clear glass. If I didn't have enough here for the size marble I was going for and had to add more, it typically creates a very small seam that affects the optics of the piece. So I always try to have plenty of clear glass, and in fact I take notes on this stuff. I always think I'll remember, but I don't, of how much clear glass I need, of which diameter for different size marbles, because it is a pretty specific thing to get the sizes to come out correctly. Again, I'll encourage you to ask questions, post lots of comments. Jody will be checking, trying to relay the questions to me. Yeah, with that, I think we'll get started. So I've got my ash all mixed up in this rod here. Some ash takes a lot more clear glass to dilute. This one is one of those cases. I do have to make 2 of these marbles for this customer, but this is still a lot more ash mixed up in the glass than I will probably need. Again, if you missed the demo on Monday, this blue flame is about 4,500 degrees. It's propane and oxygen. We're burning about 4 times as much propane, or oxygen rather, as we are propane. It's a very clean burning flame. We're combusting pretty much as hot as propane and oxygen can combust. So I'm laying on the ash first. Alright, so I've covered about maybe 3/4 inch of the end of the clear glass rod with the cremains. And that is going to be the setup for our 1.5 inch marble. That whole spiral vortex that you see inside of the marble, all of that comes from this very small section at the very tip and then gets magnified by all the clear glass that I'll melt down on top of it. So that's one of the coolest things I think about marbles is just how small the actual pattern is on the inside, but then it gets magnified big time by all that clear glass. I really love glass for that reason, its optical properties. It's one of the only mediums out there that can transmit light and have those optical properties, so I love to make marbles that really capture that. I'm just kind of melting in that ash, getting everything smoothed out and rounded again. And now I will add my dichroic glass on top of there. This customer wanted some specific colors of dichroic, so I've got them all prepped up and ready to go. Again, kind of reiterating what I talked about on Monday, dichroic glass is very sensitive to the heat. So I'm always heating just the coating with facing away from the torch. You never want to let the flame hit the coated side of that dichroic glass. Again, dichroic glass is a coating applied on a sheet of glass, predominantly made up of quartz crystal and some metal oxides, including tin. Very, very reflective type of glass. It looks a lot like a mirror, but with different color properties because of how it's created. NASA was one of the big proponents in developing it into what it is today. And the colors can be pretty hard to predict. This customer wanted blue, purple, red, and pink, I believe. So I used a green, magenta, rainbow. That's going to give you some nice pinks and a couple other color tones. This one, I believe, is going to be my green, blue, magenta. That gives a pretty nice purple. And I've also got some candy apple for the red. And a little bit of, I think it's yellow blue or gold blue for my blue. Just doing a little strip of the blue. It's really hard to get a lot of colors into a small marble like this, so I do my best, but we start on such a small scale, and certain colors have different heat tolerances, so some dichroic glass is very resilient and stays super brilliant, and others tends to burn out if it stays hot for too long. So sometimes when you're mixing and matching colors, you can get kind of a mixed bag where some of it sparkles more than the rest. Again, we just want to say thank you to everyone who is continuing to support small businesses in this time. We really appreciate it. We've been able to keep a majority of our staff on, not all, but as many as we possibly can. So we just want to keep making artwork and be ready for when this passes to have tons of inventory going into summer. I think this is the candy apple piece. One of the most red dichros available. Dichro colors, I should say. Alright, so I got all my colored dichro applied. I'm going to kind of work this back into a more uniform shape. It's a little wonky right now. Pretty common term we use in glass blowing, wonky. In the past couple of years, I've started squaring up my vortexes. And so what I mean by that is, right now as I'm melting in this dichroic, I'm actually going to kind of be squeezing it into a square or a cube shape. And the reason I do that is it actually makes more pronounced kind of layers going down into the vortex. If I kept it round and just twisted it, you'd have a really nice conical shape to your pattern in there. And by squishing it into a square or a cube and then twisting it, that gives it a little bit more of a ripple as you follow the tunnel down into the vortex. So I think it just makes it a little bit more interesting to the eye. Alright, that's looking pretty good. I need to melt down a little bit more of my lens to create a better transition here. I've got just a couple weird angles right where the dichro stops, and that could be a pretty good potential to trap a bubble there if I didn't take care of it. So I'm just heating up that transition from clear to my dichroic. Just kind of smooth that all out to avoid any air bubbles. Alright, so now I need to cover my dichroic vortex setup with some dark glass. This is going to prevent your eyes from going through these layers and seeing out the backside of the marble. If you don't do this, you kind of lose a lot of the effects of the illusion in the vortex. I'm using a dark cobalt blue glass here, cobalt number 5. Going to coat this whole setup with that dark colored glass. So I get a kick when everyone says, "Oh, I'd love to watch you make a marble sometime," because it's really kind of boring. Nothing happens very fast. It's a lot of layering. It's not nearly as dramatic as furnace-style glass blowing, where you're moving around this big piece of glass, and all of a sudden it turns into a hollow vessel, and then you're swinging it around to stretch it. Nothing dramatic like that. It's just a lot of little steps that in the end result in a really cool piece. But again, this is a small marble, second smallest size that I make, smallest with ashes. And it's going to be about 45 minutes, and that's after I've already done all the prep work for the dichroic and mixing the ashes. And so when we start to get up to my really large marbles that are 5+ inches, those are about 6 hours of continual work just like this. That's not including any of the prep work. So it's a very, very drawn out, monotonous process. And I always tell folks, I say, hey, if you've got the attention span to watch me work very slowly at something for 5 or 6 hours straight, I will be very impressed. Because I even get bored watching people blow glass. When you're doing it, you're fully engaged. You can't think or concentrate on anything else, but when you're watching someone else do it, it's a totally different story. Alright, gonna re-square that up. And now we're gonna twist it into the vortex shape. So I'll attach another handle so that I can twist. When I say twist, like right now I'm spinning the glass to keep it gravity neutral. When I twist, I'm going to be spinning one hand a little faster than the other to kind of corkscrew that pattern that I just set up. Same process we do for making icicles in our icicle making class. Which one is that demo, Jody? Is that tomorrow?
That icicles are on, yeah, tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Cool. So there's a lot of skill sets that we cover in our intro classes that can be used for many more complex projects down the line. So spinning one hand a little faster than the other, while typically not desired, definitely has a place when you're trying to get something to spiral. That's literally all it is. That's a really common question I get as well about my marbles. Is, oh, how do you get it twisted like that? And it's like, well, I just spin one hand a little faster than the other. It's no big secret. Right now I'm heating up the clear glass, kind of squeezing it down towards that transition from the pattern of the vortex. Basically kind of expanding the equator of the marble. Kind of getting that initial diameter set up. I don't feed all my lens down at this point. I feed about half, probably about half I'd say. Just enough to get that vortex kind of opened up. So now we'll let this cool. I'll remove my punty from the right side, and then I'll start bringing my cone, or the tip of the vortex, to a nice point.
And what's a punty?
Punty is a temporary handle, so this piece in my right hand, it's temporarily connected. This one's more of a hot seal, but in Italian, puntello, I believe, means bridge or to connect. And so essentially you're bridging one side of the piece to the other. So I was working on the tip, and I could do that controlling it with the left side, but when I wanted to work on the left side of the piece, I needed to control it from the right side. So essentially that punty bridges the piece of artwork as to which side you can work on. Alright, so now we'll heat up the tip of the vortex, and I'll start removing a lot of material. It's always amazing how much you have to remove to get your cone the right size and shape for the different size marbles, especially the small ones. Did you guys see the new line of drinkware we posted today? So we posted up a new line of recycled glass drinkware. It's a project I've been wanting to do for a really long time. In the hot shop, we produce a lot of waste glass. Every time you finish a piece, there's glass left over on that steel pipe, and that all just typically gets wasted. We'll sort it out and reuse the clear glass, but anything with color, you can't just throw in the pot of clear, otherwise it won't be clear glass anymore. So we've been saving it for almost 2 years and stockpiling all of that, and we finally melted our first couple of batches a few weeks ago, right before we closed. And it turns out that all the colorants in the glass burn off at the molten state, except for cobalt blue. And so we can throw all the colors we want in there, and by the time we take it out and use that melted glass, we've just got really nice, kind of a light steel transparent blue. Really, really pretty. And so we released a new line of drinkware in all of our standard shapes, stemless wine goblets, tumblers, and pint glasses. And yeah, it's all just reclaimed colored glass from our studio that otherwise would have been garbage, essentially. Jody's been taking some of those scraps as well and making magnets and pendants out of them, which is really cool to see. I had made some magnets a year ago and still never finished them. One of those projects that when there was time, I started it, and then I ran out of time and have not found time since. So stoked to have those in our gallery finally. Jody's interpretation of them, I was doing them a little different, but hers actually preserved the colors and look really pretty. So I'm coating the back of that cone now with some clear glass to kind of build it up. So in each vortex marble there is a cone. You can't lose that cone or you lose the illusion. So to maintain it, you coat it with clear glass to build out that back half into more of a hemisphere. And then I'll basically cover all this up with colored glass to hide those clear glass layers. Getting that layer all melted in. Trying to make sure I don't trap any more bubbles when I add the next layer. The next layer is going to be a black glass. That's pretty common for the backs of all my marbles. I kind of start with black. And then I'll add more colors on top of it to create my pattern. But typically I use black. So when asked by Glass Alchemy what my favorite color was, it has to be black violet. I go through more of that color in a year than any other color. It's a really nice, smooth black that doesn't like to reduce. And yeah, I don't know, I probably go through 20 to 40, not 20 to 30 pounds of it a year, I bet. So I've got some here. Next I'll layer that, and you can kind of see a little bit how there's that cone on the inside of the clear glass. It might be hard for you guys to see. Again, if it were a bigger marble, it'd be more dramatic, but I've coated that cone with clear glass to build it out so it's more closer to round. Now I'll use black glass to cover all that up and kind of give myself a new canvas to do some artwork on the backside of the marbles. Now the backs of my marbles are really one thing that sets my work apart from other marble makers, and that is due to the fact that I limit the patterns I do on the backs of my marbles to the year that they were made. So every year I do some R&D for the first, maybe 6 weeks of the year and figure out what pattern and what colors I'm really digging that year. And then I hone it down and use that pattern to decorate the backs of every marble that I make for the entire year. This 1.5" size is as small as I will do a pattern on the backside. The 1¼ marbles are really tiny, and it would just take so much more work to get that pattern on the back that I wouldn't be able to charge more for it. So I don't do it on the 1¼ but 1.5" and larger, I will do a specific background pattern. I started that over 10 years ago. I think 2009 was my first year limiting the patterns on the backside. And I, of course, used one of my favorite patterns the very first year I started. It was a feathering pattern. And it's a really old pattern in glass. The Egyptians were doing it 2,000 years ago. I think I just saw a post from someone recently that they saw a piece of glass that was even older than that had that same feather pattern. I always describe it kind of like latte art, when you get like the squiggles in your latte art, and then they do the last pass where they drag the milk through it, and it brings all those lines into like a nice kind of fluid feathered look. Same process in glass. So anyway, that was one of my favorite patterns, and I always said, okay, after 10 years, I'll revisit that pattern. So in 2019, I revisited it, put a new twist on it. It wasn't identical to what I was doing in 2009, but that's kind of been one of my potential themes as well, is after 10 years, being 10 years better, to revisit those patterns and see how much cooler I can make them after 10 years of practice. So this year, I'm not revisiting 2010's pattern. I had another idea that came to me before that, and that's actually has to do with the year 2020. I thought 2020 vision, eyes, vision. I was like, ooh, dragon's eye, that would be really fun. So this year I'm doing a dragon's eye on the back of all my marbles. Works out great because I have 10 pounds of North Star Experimental Green sitting around that I bought years ago for another project that never came to fruition. And that green color makes a beautiful green dragon's eye iris. So that's what I'm doing for this year's backing design. So now that I've melted in all my black glass for the backside, inevitably sometimes I trap a couple of bubbles. There's a couple spots on this one I might need to pop some bubbles. The really tricky part is that whenever you think that they're like, oh, those are deep enough, those aren't going to be an issue, they always come back to haunt you. So in my experience, it's better off to pop them now, even though they're not an issue yet. When you're going to round out, do the final rounding on your marble, and you're getting these bubbles trying to poke through, and it essentially puts a pretty big flaw on the back of the marble. So I don't know if you guys can see, but there's a couple darker spots in the glow. That's where my bubbles are. So I'm going to let some core heat get out of here, and then I'll go in and pop those bubbles just using the flame of my torch. I learned this bubble popping technique from Gates and Recco. He's world renowned for his universe marbles. So I've taken a handful of classes from different world-class glass blowers, Gateson being one of them, who specializes in marbles, as well as John Kabuki. And I've learned a lot about making marbles, and really John Kabuki's class is what really got me into focusing on marbles back in 2009. I took his class at Eugene, Oregon at the end of 2008, right when I was finishing up my undergrad and realized the form of a marble was really appealing to me. I'm a perfectionist, and sometimes I can even have a hard time getting started at the beginning of the day if I don't know what I need to be making or what I want to make. And so the nice thing about a marble is that it's always got to be round. And so I can start with that. Now I've narrowed down the scope of my options. And now all I have to do is figure out what style of marble, what three-dimensional design do I want on the inside, what I want on the back side. And so I like having my options a little more limited, because as a person with ADHD, it can be really hard to make those decisions on a daily basis. So yeah, that was kind of how I got really focused in on making marbles. Essentially, to pop these bubbles, I've just got a really pinpoint flame, and it kind of bores into the glass and pushes all the glass away from where the bubble is, and then that glass gets so thin on top of the bubble that it eventually just pierces through and pops it. I've kind of got two little craters now. I'm going to fill those in with a couple dots of black glass. Can you see that at all, or is it just a white glowing mass?
It's kind of a white glowing mass.
Alright, so now I'll round that out a little bit and melt in my little patches. That's essentially what I did, is just patched over those holes. And then I'll be ready to begin my background design. Another cool event that we're doing starting this week is a Design Your Own Pendant event. So we've kind of done some designer events in the past. They've typically all been up in the hot shop, but we thought this would be a good chance to try a Design Your Own Pendant class. So we're taking submissions through what, today or tomorrow?
For a while, actually.
Okay.
For a little while, yeah.
Because we'll do a couple different sessions of it over the next few weeks. But if you go to our homepage, lakesuperiorartglass.com, there's a link on the homepage to direct you to a form where you can submit your pendant design. They might not all be feasible, but throw it out there, we'll take a look, and we'll see what we can make. It'd be a fun opportunity for folks to customize a pendant and then be able to watch me make it.
There's an image upload link on that page as well, so you can draw a picture.
Yeah, pictures really help, 'cause it's hard to convey exactly the same picture just through words. So what you're envisioning might not be what I get from your narrative. So yeah, sketch a picture as well, that'd be super helpful. My first dot of color is that experimental green. It's going to be a really nice green, like variegated green color when it's all done. It starts out looking black. Again, one of those colors that I always label, because you just never know. I've done it with that color before. I thought it was black and coated a whole marble with it, and that was not what I was going for. Next, I'll use a little bit of a really intense black called Raven. That's going to be for the pupil. Black violet is not dense enough to use in a small scale like this. Every black is technically another color that's just really saturated. So black violet is just that. It's a violet-based black. So if you get it thin enough, it'll start to look a really pretty kind of amethyst purple color. Raven is a much more dense black, so it's going to stay black in this small application. So that little dot will be the pupil. We'll get that melted in. Now that it's melted in, I have to make it look like a dragon's eye. Dragons don't have round pupils, right? I mean, all the ones I've seen at the zoo have really long ones. So I'm going to use a raking pattern, or raking technique, to elongate my dots that I put on there. A lot of surface designs in glass are literally just manipulations of lines and dots. So I did a dot stack here. And now I'm going to stretch it out with this little rake. Just a little dental pick, essentially. So now I've got a nice linear orientation to that black dot that I put on there. I could just take a stringer and draw it across, but what I like about raking is that it brings some of the green glass with it and provides a little bit more direction to the iris of the dragon's eye. So that's what I really like about picking just one pattern to do for the whole year. It lets me really hone in on a process and learn everything about it, and throughout the course of the year I'm learning new shortcuts or tricks or things that make it turn out better, which of course leaves me saying like, man, why didn't I think of that like 4 months ago? But that's one of those things in glassblowing. You have to do something hundreds of times before you really find the most efficient and best practice way to achieve something.
Could say that's true in most art forms, right?
Yep, I would agree. Absolutely. Now I'm going to add a clear coat. If you don't add the clear, which I've done on at least one marble this year, I forgot that step, the iris doesn't turn green at all. It just looks black. And a black iris and a black pupil looks like nothing. So clear layer is very, very important. And this clear coating technique I actually learned from Salt, a really well-known glassblower. I learned how to make eyes and hands from him back in 2009. So I'll melt that in. So my background designs are something I really take pride in. Again, it really sets my work apart from other marble makers, and that they are unique to that year, and I've spent the whole year refining that pattern. But in a lot of cases, especially on a marble this size, it almost doubles the amount of time that goes into making it. Had I just left the backside black, I probably could have been done with this marble by now. But the background patterns are really important to me. They're a big part of why I do marbles, and even though they're not the focus of the piece, it is a really unique part of it. All right. We've got our clear-coated eye all done. Now I need to make the eyelids, and so to create more of a scaled look, I'm going to be using a dot pattern called Hobnail. I learned this one, I think, from a Sue Ellen Fowler video back in the day when there was no YouTube and you could only learn glassblowing through books and DVDs, and eventually through some of the forums online. But I got a Sue Ellen Fowler video back in probably 07 or 08, I bet. Hobnail or fish scale, I guess I don't know quite what the true difference is, but essentially it's just many, many overlapping dots. So for the first layer, I'm doing a color called, I think it's Caramel Luster. I don't even know if Glass Alchemy still makes that color, they might. Just kind of a tan color, kind of an earthy sand color. And so when you're doing this hobnailing or fish scaling, you have to melt each ring of dots in almost completely before you can move to the next. And so I'll do the math here again because I don't remember it off the top of my head. So yeah, each one of my background patterns for the marbles this year for these dragon's eyes contains 35 individual dots of colored glass, all manipulated in different ways to achieve different looks, but it gives you a little bit of an insight to the intricacy of these background designs. So now I'll start putting a ring of dots slightly lower and offset right in between my first set of dots. So that's why this can also be considered like a fish scale pattern, because it kind of looks, the way it overlaps, looks a little bit like a fish scale. No questions yet, huh, Jody?
We've had Ashley said that this is mesmerizing, and we had one more person say that they loved glass.
Nice.
But that's all I'm seeing anyway.
All right. Well, again, if you guys have questions, shout them out. I'm happy to answer as best I can.
Last time they weren't popping up, so I apologize if I am missing anybody's.
Even though when you're working on little stuff, you usually don't sweat a whole lot, you still get super dehydrated working around this dry heat all day. So it's important to drink lots of water, even if you're not a glass blower.
Brian asked, how big can you make your marbles? Is there a size limit?
Right now, the largest I think I've gotten up to is about 5.5 inches, 5 5/8. For reference, a bowling ball I believe is 8 inches. I did just get a 6-inch mold from Dan Grumling, the master marble mold maker. And so my hope this spring and early summer is to make some marbles that are 6+ inches. But it is a lot of glass when you get up to that scale. I've been told by someone smarter than me that it's not exponential growth, the rate of a sphere, or the growth of the sphere, but it's logarithmic. And so you can see all the clear glass I used for the setup for this little marble. And so basically imagine that being 2 inches thick, and about 3 feet of that is on average about what it takes to make about a 5.5 inch marble. So there's a lot of material that goes into those big ones. So yeah, that's my limit at this point. Is your only constraint is your ability to control the glass and how much heat you can throw at it. Because the bigger it is, the more firepower you're going to need to get it hot and round it out. So the torch I've got is the Cobra. It's I want to say probably about the 4th biggest in the lineup for melting glass. Right now I'm only using it at about half of its potential, so I'm not working on a very big marble.
Do you have a favorite style?
Style of marble, maybe?
Yep, Loki wants to know.
Yeah, I would probably say Vortexes. I just love that illusion. Let's see, what color am I on here? Oh, this. Yeah, I love using the optics of the glass, so I would have to say Vortexes are my absolute favorite. What I consider my signature style, I started those in 2009, and those are kind of a culmination of all my favorite marble making techniques. So it's a Vortex. I put opals in them. These days I'm putting spherical opals and doing several of them. And for all the coloring, I fume, which is the process of melting fine silver and or 24 karat gold to create the coloration. And so through that process, it's really hard to quantify how much metal is going on the glass. So each one ends up a little bit different color tone, and that's why I consider them my signature series, because no two are ever identical as far as color or patterning or things like that, even though they're part of the same series.
Mike Tonder says hi.
Hi, Mike. Tell Jody hi as well. So I've got my last ring of dots on here. I'm going to flip it this way because I know some folks have really enjoyed seeing that setup. Are they able to see the...
It's coming down. You can see it more now.
Sweet. Yeah, you can kind of see the different dot layers and
there you go, yeah.
some of the fish scaling. Fish scaling or hobnailing. Hobnailing might not have the overlapping now that I'm thinking about it. This might be more of a fish scale technique. That's what I always worry about doing these videos. We're gonna say, oh, well, that's not hobnailing, that's fish scaling. Okay, I don't know. Something like that. Alright, so we're gonna get this all melted in. And right about now is when I like to give the eye its final shape. Right now it's a pretty round shape. And every dragon's eye that I've seen is a little bit more, elongated, kind of like a human eye. Comes to points in the corners, so I stretch it again with my raking tool. Give it more of that long shape. Wide and narrow, however you want to look at it. Gotta be quick. We're gonna get that all melted in. You'll see I have two sizes of marble molds down here. I always keep one marble mold ready that's the next size larger than what I'm trying to make, especially for this part where I'm trying to melt in dots and texture. If you're right at that limit of your final diameter and you've got a bump sticking off, but it's going to clip the side of that mold. So I always have one mold that's one size larger to help getting the initial rounding dialed in. Alright, so everything's melted in nice and flush. The very back of my marble is pretty round. So now it's time to let that cool and go back to heating up the equator and then some of the lens. So generally we always want the equator of the marble to be where the division between the clear lens and the colored backing starts. On little ones like this, with how much detail is on the inside and then all the layers I add on the back, a lot of times that equator is a little higher, not quite at the 50% mark. But we're going to expand that equator area because our marble is definitely not round. It's actually the right diameter this direction, but not even close that direction. So we'll stick a punty on the bottom. Again, one of those temporary handles.
Lisa has 3 of your marbles and she loves them all.
Who does?
Lisa Remington.
Nice. They're my absolute favorite thing to make. Alright, so now I'm going to put a bunch of heat into that equator area because when I start feeding and squeezing the clear glass from the left side down into the marble, I want the marble to get wider at that transition. It's another one of those lessons that took me quite a while to learn back when I was really getting into marbles. Is that a lot of times I'd have flaws right at the equator from clear to color. And what I came to realize is that it was because I was using the mold to force the glass into a sphere versus using heat and centrifugal force. So that's why I do it this way, is to avoid wearing out the glass. Essentially, if you use the mold too much, you start to wear out the surface glass and it no longer is glossy. So when I tell people that I use a mold to help shape them, immediately people think that I just pour the glass into the mold. And it couldn't be further from the truth. The mold is just a guide to help get it round. Once you've established the volume of your marble and the shape as close to spherical as you can humanly get it, that's where the mold really steps in to help finalize and really true up that shape. So I'm gently squeezing together, kind of feeding some clear glass in from the left side, building up that lens. Now you can see the profile.
So for those of you watching, this looks very easy because Dan's done this a million times, but keeping it straight like that is very difficult. The weight in the middle wants to bring it down.
I'm going to feed in a little more glass. I just kind of size it up to my mold there, and I feel like I could get away with a little more. And in my opinion, the more lens, the better. Again, the optical properties of that clear glass are awesome, so if I can add more lens to every marble, I would do it. It's kind of fun watching the video I did on Monday, watching myself work. I've never really watched a video of myself work before, and just seeing what my hands do, because when they're spinning like this, it's autopilot. I'm not thinking at all about what they're doing. And when I switch directions, it's because what my hands are feeling. It's a little bit of my eyes telling my hands what to do if something's a little off center, but a lot of it's just my hands feeling any little weird pressures that would make me want to switch directions. And switching directions just kind of helps throw the glass back towards center. Right now I'm just trying to spin really steadily, so I'm not switching directions. If I were, I could start kind of wrinkling the glass or making it do some less than ideal things. That's looking a little better for sizing. So again, nowhere close to round yet, but it's getting better. Now I'll break off my punty and kind of re-round this backside and start getting to more of a true spherical shape. So this step takes a little while. It's just basically building up a ton of heat all the way to the core of this piece of glass so that I can start to reshape it. Again, I don't want to use that mold to force it into a sphere. I need to get everything really, really hot.
How hot is it?
The flame's about 4,500, and the glass, when it's getting soft enough to work with, is going to be probably 2,200, 2,300 degrees. Definitely cooler towards the core and hotter on the surface. 2350 is fairly liquid for borosilicate or Pyrex glass. That's the type of glass that I work with and that we use in our Flamework Studio. Up in the hot shop, we use what's nicknamed soft glass. It's not Pyrex. It's pretty far from Pyrex, in fact. Glass is measured by how it expands and contracts. And the coefficient of expansion is what that measurement is called. Pyrex or borosilicate has an expansion rate of 33, whereas soft glass up in the hot shop has an expansion rate of 96. So essentially what that means is that the soft glass up in the hot shop, when it's heated or cooled, expands and contracts about 3 times as much as Pyrex or borosilicate does. It's also nicknamed soft glass because it stays softer for longer. It's designed for artists to use, so we want to keep it as malleable as we can, which is typically only 5 to 25 or 30 seconds, depending on how thick the glass is. Whereas back in the Flamework Studio, I would say it's more on the order of like 1 to 15 seconds maybe. Now is when I'm really using that marble mold to help round it out. Constantly spinning it in that mold. My sizing looks great. I think this is going to be spot on for an 1.5 inch diameter marble. Alright, so I'm really happy with about 2/3 of this, how it's rounded. Obviously the very point where I'm holding it is not round yet, but everything else is looking really good. So this last heat is just a good flame polish to get out any tool marks from the mold. And now I'm going to let it cool, and then I'll stick a punty on the bottom, and melt off the handle that's on there now, and round out the front half of the marble. So as it cools, you might be able to start seeing the two halves of the marble. And eventually you might even be able to start seeing into that vortex. This is kind of one of the first chances you get to look inside of the marble that you made. Everything you're doing prior to this is all based on experience and feel and just knowing what you're shooting for, because you can't ever look inside to check to make sure it's going how you want it to. So this would be the first chance I'd have to look inside, and sometimes I'll throw the bright light on there. I don't know if that helps you guys see it better at home.
Yeah.
So there's our first glimpse into the vortex. It's a really nice one. It opens up really wide at the equator and tapers down really tight at the bottom, which is what I'm always looking for. They don't all turn out that way, no matter how many I've made. And now we'll stick our punty on the bottom and melt off the handle on my left hand. So you guys can see I used all but about 1 inch of that clear glass that I had prepped up on this handle to make this marble. I thought I had more than enough, and I barely did, but it's just a good reminder that it's always better to have a little more than what you think you're going to need. Sometimes you just need to add a little bit extra. You know, if my equator had ended up higher, I would have melted down the rest of this clear glass and made my marble a little bigger than 1.5 inches in diameter, just to make it look better, to try to get that clear and color ratio to 50-50.
Kathy wants to know how heavy or sore your arms get when you're maintaining certain positions, especially when you have a large marble.
You know, not too bad. I use rollers or yokes to support the weight of the heavier ones. So these guys here. So I do all of my marbles up to about 4 inches freehand on the torch like this, using those yokes to support the weight. And then after that I switch to my lathe, and that supports the weight for me, because a 4-inch marble, I believe, is close to about 4 pounds of glass, and I don't remember what the weights are going up from there, but 6 hours of spinning 4 pounds of glass gets super hard. That's why I got the lathe years ago, just because I realized that if I wanted to make really big marbles, which has been my goal since 2009, I was going to burn out my forearms probably long before I finished a career of making big marbles. So, but yeah, my arms don't get too sore. They're pretty used to holding them up like this for long periods of time. My forearms get a little bit tired just from the spinning, and actually I typically feel more sore in my forearms and hands after about 4 days of not blowing glass. My hands are so used to this after 17 years that it's when I take a break from doing it and I'm, you know, away for a show or on vacation or something and I don't do it, by about day 4 my forearms and wrists start to hurt a little bit, just because they're not doing what they're used to. So this is probably going to be the last time in the mold. Everything is shaping up really nicely. Now, a lot of times marble makers switch punties 1 or 2 more times, putting one more on the lens to re-round the back. But I got this sphere so close to the diameter I was looking for originally that I don't really need to go back and re-round from the back side. It adds a lot more time. The bigger marbles I definitely do that, but the small ones I don't.
How are the marbles displayed so that they can best be appreciated? Jane wants to know.
You know, the more light the better. So if you have a display case with lights in it, or you know, have any track lighting or things like that, yeah, the more light the better. Sunlight is one of the best ways to light them if you have a window that gets a lot of nice sun. Yeah, the more direct light you get on them, the better. That being said, any of the marbles that I make with dichroic glass with the sparkles, that material is inherently designed to reflect light. And so even in non-direct light, it kind of gathers light from the room and reflects it back out. So it's not that they don't sparkle under direct light, but the more light you get on them, the more they sparkle.
All of Dan's marbles come with a marble stand as well.
Yeah, yep, good points. They all come with stands so they don't roll away on you. Right now I'm just checking the surface of the marble. I use this flame as a beam of light, so I'm watching the reflection of that flame on the surface of the marble. And if it bends or wavers or distorts, then I know that that surface glass is not fully smooth. This one's looking pretty good. So I'm going to finish it off. So to do that, the final step, everyone always asks, how do you get it off of your last handle? It's pretty simple. I use the mold. This glass isn't hot enough to change shape anymore. It's still over 1,000 degrees, but it's not going to change shape by setting it in here. So I set it in. I'll use this little rod of glass to tap my punty, and you'll see how delicately this is attached. A couple little taps and it breaks free. And then I'll use my torch to polish that last point of connection. If any marble makers are watching, they're probably thinking I'm using a really big flame for this step, but I've actually found it to be really helpful since I don't do a second or third punty to re-round the backside. This gives the whole backside a nice flame polish. And it kind of superheats the backside and does it more quickly than using my smaller flame. Now with this dragon's eye, I need to let that experimental green color kind of strike out. And so that's what we're going to do now. So I've polished the surface. The surface should be pretty good. As it cools, that color turns from black to blue and then to green. It usually takes 2 or 3 heats to get it to the green color that I'm looking. So you can just barely start to see a little bit of the blue now. I'm going to turn on my flame as a light source. You might be able to see it a little better now. Kind of see that blue hue in there. So that's the first strike. Now that it's not really glowing anymore, I'll do that same thing again, heat it up to a glow, and let it cool.
Noah Fiskness says, hi Dan, thanks for the entertainment.
Yeah, thanks for watching, Noah. Alright, I'll let that cool again. I have to be careful at this step because I get antsy. I don't like to just stand around and wait for things, so I usually start doing something else. And I've actually forgotten marbles in the mold and gone off and done something else and came back and found them just shattered. So, I don't know if
Why
you guys
would they do that?
Well, because they cool too quickly. The outside is going to cool and shrink before the inside does, and that's going to cause some internal stress and make the whole thing crack apart typically.
And if you ever take a class with us, that's why you have to pick up your work the next day.
Yeah. I'm thinking this is probably pretty good. Can you guys see that coloring in there?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a nice blue-green.
Wants you to explain striking.
Yeah. Striking is just something that happens in colored glass from being heated and cooled. I don't know quite all the details on chemically what does it, but there's just different metals in the glass that make it change as it's heated and cooled. So a lot of times it has to do with how the piece is, how slowly it's cooled. So when I use that experimental green color to create the dragon's eye, the whole time I was working with it, it stayed black because it had been heated to a molten state and then kept above the temperature that it struck at. So at the end of the process here, my kiln doesn't get hot enough to strike it, so I have to flame strike it. And so essentially I'm letting it cool down to like that 1,000-degree mark, and then bumping it back up to probably 1,500 or 1,600, I bet. Maybe even more, maybe 1,800, and then letting it cool down to 1,200 and back up to 18. And that makes the chemicals in that color start to change visually to our eyes. I don't know more than that about it. I think germanium might be one of the chemical elements used in a lot of striking colors. Silver is another one. And the heating and cooling process will bring those out. So for my silver-based fumed marbles, whether it's Signature Series or the Waves of the Galaxy, I strike those in the kiln. The kiln gets up to about 1125 for the striking colors that it does in there. And I'll let those marbles sit in there for days sometimes. And every day we ramp up and keep it hot all day and work out of it, and then overnight it cools, and every day that color changes a little bit. So that's kind of the rundown of striking glass. It's just a chemical process within certain colors, and that's as much as I know.
And if you wanted to make your own marbles, could you do it here?
Yeah, so we do a marble making class. It's one of our intermediate classes, so we ask that you take our 3 introduction classes first: icicle, pendant making, and wine goblet. That'll give you a little bit of a foundation. We also want to set students up for success. And the trickiest part about marbles is, yes, getting them round, but it's that punty. It's really hard, or it's really easy to melt that punty into your marble, and when it doesn't break off the way mine did, then you have to melt it off, and then you have a bump there, and you have to then remelt that half of the marble to get rid of the bump. So we like folks to come into that class with a little more skill, just so they can be more successful. So yeah, that's our marble making class. Obviously we rolled out a bunch more intermediate and advanced classes up in our hot shop this year too. So if you haven't checked our classes page for a while, definitely do that. As soon as we're back up and running and things are back to normal, we have a lot more classes to offer. I think last summer we had a total of 8 classes or so that were officially offered, or maybe even 7, and this year we're probably up to 12, I want to say, something like that. So yeah, a lot of fun things. We're always working on new things, because I know a lot of you folks have taken several of our classes and want to keep moving on and trying the next thing, and so we're happy to coach you through that.
Awesome.
So yeah, with that, that's how I make a Galaxy Vortex marble. Appreciate you guys watching, and continue to support small businesses during this time. It's a really crazy time right now, and we're all in this together, so stay safe out there. Social distancing, don't go out unless you absolutely have to. Keep tuning into events like this. We want to keep you guys engaged and show you what we do and connect with you during this time. So yeah, share your thoughts, post comments. We'd love to hear what you thought, and if you have any other suggestions of things you'd like to see made, definitely let us know. Thanks a lot, you guys. Take care.